He's full of fire and brimstone. We think that the Old Testament is a schizo God, and when we get to the New Testament, Jesus is a shepherd who plays with lambs all day.
Riverside Church, located at 3045 Richardson Bridge Road in Princeton, North Carolina. Join us as we unleash the Bible one verse at a time.
Of that, the river. I'm Pastor Kevin, and of course, you're watching at the River, the outreach ministry of Riverside Church, nestled perfectly between Princeton and Grantham, right there on Richardson Bridge Road. We would love for you to come see us one of our service times, Sunday morning at 10 a.m. and don't forget Sunday evening at 6 p.m. And no, don't forget midweek service starting at 7 o'clock. We would love for you to come join us one of our service times. In the meantime, why don't you grab your Bible, open up to the book of Hebrews as we begin our study in the book of Hebrews. On Sunday nights, we're going through the book of Hebrews, and we would love for you to come and join us as we break it down verse by verse, chapter by chapter, to give you a little bit of background on what Hebrew is, who wrote Hebrews, and what it's about. I want you to imagine right there the letter being written by some anonymous person. Most theologians and commentaries say that the book of Hebrews was written by none other than the Apostle Paul, and that's my personal opinion as well, because he has such a grasp of the Old Testament, and he has an understanding of the gospel. And he wrote this little letter to some Jews that were on the outskirts of Rome. We can read that in the book of Hebrews chapter 13, not to give anything away. This little house church that gets together week after week. Can you imagine about 20 or so people gathering in a house that receive a letter from the apostle who he helped plant a church there? In fact, the apostle Paul was on his way to Rome as he appealed to Caesar after he was arrested for preaching the gospel. But the gospel got there before he did, and he writes this little letter because of Hebrews 13. He sends his greetings there to the church in the Italian area in that region. And as Paul wrote this little church, I want you to imagine that they get this letter and they read it to one another. What Paul was doing is he's reiterating the gospel to those there in that little house church. And 2,000 years later, the book of Hebrews actually puts rhubarb and concrete in our soul. It causes us to have an anchor and a blessed assurance in who Jesus is. If you are wondering why the book of Hebrews was written, it's because those Jews at that time were considering walking away from the faith. If you would imagine being a Jew in this time period, if you were someone who was a Jew right there in Jerusalem, if you remember around 70 AD or 79 AD, there was a huge persecution that took place there in the region of Judea. The Jews were rising up against the people of the way. That's what they used to call Christians. They followed the way, the one who says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. They followed Jesus, and that way that they were known, identified as the people of the way, and later were called Christians at Antioch, as we read in the book of Acts. But at this point, persecution starts to swell up, and the church there in Jerusalem starts to disperse. People start to run. Later on, Jesus predicted that the people of Rome would come in and destroy the temple and level Jerusalem, which took place in 70 AD. But now at this point, these Jews that have left the sanctity, they left Jerusalem, have now established as little churches all over the place. And there they had been contemplating, because of the persecution of Rome, because at this time Claudius, the emperor, has been thinking about destroying and running all the Jews out of the country, and now he starts to put his focus on the Christians. He starts to look at the Christians, and then Nero, who will come after him, really starts to persecute the Christians. So at this point, if you are a Jew and you start serving Jesus, what you do is you walk away from your whole livelihood. You walk away from your family. You walk away from your trade. Imagine if you were a blacksmith or someone who was in pottery, and that was your job. In the Jewish culture, what you would do is join a guild. You would join other people who did the same trade as you, because in biblical times there was no such thing as insurance. There was no workers' comp. There was no unemployment. So if you would fall ill, if you were to get sick, or some kind of tragedy would fall upon you and your family, you would lean upon your guild, and they would take care of you until you were able to get back on your feet. But once you proclaim Jesus Christ, you're out of the guild. Not only you're out of the guild, you're out of the culture, you're out of the synagogue. You have no part of us. So these Christians now who have walked away from the Jewish traditions and the laws of Moses have now embraced Jesus Christ and the church. But now they're starting to notice what they walked away from. They're starting to realize, hey, this is hard. Hey, I don't know if we're cut out for this. Not only are we facing persecution from the world, but we've had our families cut us off. We're considered the black sheep. Now people consider us outlaws. And now we might be facing the plundering of our property. We might face jail time because now we embrace Jesus Christ. So Paul writes the book of Hebrews to encourage Christians who have been contemplating just giving up. Have you ever considered that, Christian? Have you ever thought of that? Have you ever considered just throwing in the towel because Christianity is hard? Real men trust Jesus. Real men serve Christ. Real men embrace grace and mercy. Real men forgive. Real men follow Christ. The rest of the culture in the world, they fall into line. The dead fish go downstream, but the real alive fish go against the current. Here, Paul was writing the book of Hebrews to embrace Christians, to stay strong. But how does he do it? He doesn't go through the benefits of being a Christian. He doesn't tell you it's a good lifestyle to lead. It doesn't tell you that you'll have a clean, nice, simple lifestyle. He doesn't talk about morality. He doesn't talk about those things. He actually looks at the center of all of Christianity. He begins in Hebrews chapter number 1. Follow along with me as we break this little letter down. In Hebrews chapter number 1, Paul writes, long ago and at many times, and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the way of the prophets. Beginning in verse 1, as we pause here and pump the brakes, Paul says, in times past, long ago. How did God speak to us long ago? The Bible reveals to us that God actually walked in the garden with Adam and Eve physically, because the Bible tells us in the book of Genesis chapter number 3 that Adam heard him walking in the cool of the day. He was physically walking and speaking. It actually tells us a little bit later that he actually comes to our friend Abraham and speaks to him. We understand that he danced in the fire with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He was there. He spoke in visions and dreams with Jacob and later on Joseph. He spoke through a burning fiery bush to Moses there at the wilderness of Sinai. We understand in various times in past situations, he spoke to God's people in various ways. That's what it says. Many times and long ago, we understand in the book of Exodus that he actually spoke to his people by the casting of the lots from behind the ephod, that they would pull their hands out and have the white rock or the black rock and decide on what God says, as if they were casting lots. In times past, God spoke to his people in various ways. He spoke through the donkey to Balaam. He spoke from the whirlwind as he took up Elijah. He spoke through fire as he brought down the fire at Mount Carmel on the enemies of God as they worshiped Baal. And there we saw the showdown of Elijah and the 450 prophets. Jesus is now how he speaks to us now, because that's what the text tells us. In verse number 2, but in these last days, notice 2,000 years ago, the apostle was saying, these are the last days, it's counting down. I know it's something that's recently been ticking up as we say these are the last days. Maybe it's the last hours or the last minutes. Let that resonate in your soul and your heart, that you won't be around always. But time is ticking down like the hours of the sand glass as the sand falls through. There's not many days left. You don't have many more sunrises. You don't have many more good mornings or good nights. In these last days is what the text tells us. He has spoken to us by his son. His son is not Buddha or Muhammad, Krishna, or one of the 50 million Hindu gods. It's Jesus Christ. The text tells us here that in these last days he's spoken to us. This is better than a burning bush, is what he's saying. That Jesus is better than the old covenant. Jesus is better than an 8-ball that you shake and say, should I go and do this and wait for an answer? Jesus is better than tarot cards. Jesus is better. Jesus is better than happenstance and random throws of the dice. Jesus is better. Jesus is better than the sign in the sky and the stars. Jesus is better. But you might be sitting here saying, well, where do I see Jesus? Where do I find Jesus? I'll tell you the story of the old man who walked into the chapel early one evening. As it was being twilight, he started to look up at the stained glass window, and there on the window was Jesus being crucified. He looks in the stained glass window and he weeps and cries and he says, reveal yourself to me. Show yourself to me. Show me yourself. Show me. Reveal it to me. And all he had to do is look down from the stained glass window to the text. The Bible points to Jesus. Listen to me, viewer. If you want to see Jesus in all his glory and understand wisdom and have unbelievable, untapped knowledge, if you want to have grace and mercy poured out on you like Niagara Falls, if you want to be vaccinated against anger, bitterness, and grudges, if you want to be saved to the uttermost, look to the text, because the text points to Jesus. This is better than anything that the world has to offer. The Bible is held in high regard because it points to Jesus. He is the author and the finisher of our faith. The text tells us, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed. First of all, he says heir. In the next few verses, we're going to look at 7 different things that are described as this Son who was known as Jesus. He tells us here, first of all, that he's an heir. When an heir is someone who is bequeathed, someone who receives all authority, all power. He receives the full ownership of the estate, the heir. Jesus is the heir. Many of us have this twisted idea or thought that Jesus is in a high chair beside God, that he's a demigod, he's a junior God, he's a lesser God. But the Bible actually tells us that he sits shoulder to shoulder with God. He is fully God and fully man. This, in theological circles, is called the hypostatic union. That means he's fully God and fully man united together with the nature of God and the nature of man. He understands God in his righteousness and his holiness, and he understands man in his fallenness. Who better to be a mediator between the two than the one who understands completely both sides? Whenever we need a mediator, whenever we need a friend, it's better to have someone who sympathizes with you and understands you. And who better than the heir of all things? That means all responsibility has fallen on him. That means he owns everything that has been given to him. The Bible tells us that the earth is not flat, that it's not round, that it's actually shaped like a footstool, that the earth is his footstool. He rests his feet on it. He doesn't rest his feet there because he's tired. You might have an ottoman in your house, or you might have a footstool right there in your living room or your bedroom that you would lay your feet on and just rest your weary feet. These dogs are barking. I got to rest them. You slip off your shoes at the end of the day. Rub your feet. At this point, we need to understand that the text tells us that the earth is his footstool, and he don't put it there because his feet are tired, because he's been standing all day at the factory. No, he puts his feet there to symbolize and show us that he has authority over the earth. He's the heir. If you put your feet on something, everything that you stand over, you're more powerful than. That's why the earth is his footstool. Not that he's weary and he's tired, but he's resting his feet on it because everything is under his feet. Everything is under his feet. That he's above it all. That he is the heir. That means it all belongs to him. And Paul will actually reiterate that. If this ain't enough to get you to shout, yeah, God is the heir. Jesus is the heir. He has it. It's all been given to him. Well, this would surely put a little fire in your bones. It says that he's the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. This tells me he's an heir and he's the creator. That the Jesus you serve, Christian, is the creator of everything. From the outhouse to the penthouse to the crack house, he created everything. He created the evil and the good. He's God. He created the darkness and the light. He's God. He created everything. From the puppy dogs, the chickens, the crackhead, the old blue-haired lady on the front row of your church, to the preacher in the pulpit, to the pimp on the corner. He created it all. He created it all. He's God. He created it all, is what he says about this Jesus, whom also he created the world. He's the author and the finisher of our faith, as we read in the book of Philippians. The book of Revelation actually tells us that he's the Alpha and Omega. Those are the first two letters of the Greek alphabet. What he's telling us is he's the A and the Z. He's the bookend of everything. He's at the beginning and the end. And if he's here and there, he's all in between. That he created it all. That he's the source of it all. He's the author of it all. I know we say history. History is really his story. It's his story. He's the one who is the heir of all things. And he created everything. Christian, I know your head might be down and your shoulders slumped. I know your heart might be heavy. I know it feels like the mist won't lift and you feel like you're in a valley. But I want to let you know there's an heir and there's a creator of everything. Do you feel the world starting to lift off your shoulders? I know we sing the song, he's got the whole world in his hands. We do well to remember that song that the children sing. He's got the whole world in his hands. Well, we understand that he holds the whole world, so we don't have to. We don't have to be like Atlas, who has the whole world on his shoulders. If you understand that Greek God, it's that man cut out of marble whose knees are buckling because the whole world is on his shoulders. But our God created everything, and he's the heir of everything. So his knees ain't buckling. If he can create it, he can certainly lift it. He can certainly sustain it. He created it all. So you don't have to. He tells us here. Also, he created the world. We understand that he's the heir and he's the creator. In verse 3, he's the radiance of the glory of God. It tells us here that he's the radiance. He's the radiator. If you look to the moon late at night, you'll see that on a crisp, clear night and the moon is out, it's not at a crescent, a full moon. Look at the moon. You'll notice that it's simply reflecting. Many of us think that Jesus simply reflects the glory of God. That he is just, the light is bouncing off of Jesus because God, of course, is light. That's not what the text says. That's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible tells us that Jesus radiates, not reflects. Reflects is what we look in the mirror. It reflects the light. It bounces off of us and we can see it. But radiate means to be the source of, like the sun. The sun radiates heat. The sun radiates power and light and fire. It's the source of the light that photosynthesis in our world. It causes everything to live. There's nothing that the sun don't touch, and if the sun don't touch it, it's underground. It's probably dead. We see that Jesus radiates. Well, what does he exactly radiate? First of all, we understand he's an heir. He created everything, and he's the radiance of the glory of God. That all glory, if you want to know what God's glory looks like, look to Jesus. If you want to know what he puts up with, what he tolerates, look to Jesus. If you want to know if he forgives, look to Jesus. He radiates exactly the glory of God. Whenever we see his glory on display, it's not at the resurrection. His glory on display is not in heaven when he's seated at the right hand of the Father. His glory was on the cross as he bears the wrath and the sin for sinners there. The curse of God was placed on him for his glory, for sinners like you and me. It was for his glory and for my good. God be the glory. He radiates forgiveness and mercy. He radiates wrath. He radiates mercy and power. We see that Jesus is the heir. He's the creator of the world. He radiates the glory of God. And the Bible tells us in verse 3, and the exact imprint of his nature. Imprint, what does that mean? In biblical times, you would receive a letter. And usually that letter is sealed with a little bit of wax. But on the wax, there's an imprint. There's an impression made on the wax. And usually you would look for a symbol. The symbol is usually found on the sender's ring, a signet ring. They would press their ring into that wax, that soft wax. That way when you received the letter, you knew it was from your buddy. You knew it was from the king or the monarch. You knew it was from the duke. You knew it was from an official because their signet ring was pressed there on the wax. And you break the seal and open it. Usually like when we read our emails, we see who it's from. But here, he's the imprint of God. That means he is God who has been signed off on. This is who I am. This comes from me. He is the actually imprint. He is the exact imprint of his nature. Jesus sat with sinners. That's what the Bible tells us. He sat with the people of the night. He sat with tax collectors. He sat with people who are deplorable. He sat with people who many church members try to avoid. But notice when he sat with them, he didn't sin with them. He called them to repentance because that's the nature of God. He seeks out that which is lost. He restores the broken. He binds up the brokenhearted. He causes the blind to see. That's the nature of Jesus. That's what Jesus and God are like. He is the exact imprint. That's what God is like. If you want to know what God is like, you look to Jesus. He is the imprint of his nature. And this, the Bible tells us in verse 3, you got to look at this. You got to see it. Don't miss this. And he upholds the universe by the power of his word. Or really it says the word of his power. He upholds everything. He created everything. He inherited everything. He radiates everything. And he is the imprint of the nature of God. And he holds it all together. He is the upholder. He's the one he's the glue that holds all of this together. He's the glue that holds it all together. By the power of his word is what the text says. Richard Hawkins, one of the greatest theoretical physicists who ever lived, actually tried to look at the distance between one point of the universe to the other. And he said, I can't calculate it because the points keep repelling each other. That means they keep growing apart from each other. Mr. Hawkins in his wheelchair claimed that he was an atheist, and how possibly could he believe in a God that the Christians believe in? When the Bible actually explains his questions. The Bible tells us in the beginning God said, let there be light. And if the universe is ever expanding, that means the words that went out from God's mouth to create is still echoing throughout the cosmos. That's why the creation and all of the galaxies are still expanding and growing, because God didn't say stop. That all of creation is still growing. That the cosmos and the universes are still expanding. They're being birthed in all of creation and space. Here we see that he upholds the universe by the word of his power. If it says he upholds it, then why are you trying to hold up everything? Well, why are you trying to piece everything and hold it together? Why are you putting Band-Aids on everything trying to fix it? Why haven't you took it to the one who holds it all together? Plainly, let me just say it plainly. Have you prayed about it? I know you might be in the dungeon and you're around all the other prisoners. You might be in a cell and you're in there with all kinds of people who have all kinds of problems. But look up, Christian. The door is open and you have access to the throne room. Why stay in the dungeon when you can go boldly before the throne of grace to the one who upholds it by the power of his word, going to him, beseeching him, crying out to him with supplications and tears, saying, God, help me in my time of need. Help my heart, help my mind, help the prodigal, help me in my situation. God, you uphold the world by the power of your word. Surely, Lord, you see me here. Surely, Lord, I have held on to my problems far too long. When you are so powerful and so mighty, you can help me. Are you getting stronger in your faith? As I pull back the curtain and wipe away all the details, off the smudges, off the glass, and have a clearer picture of Jesus Christ. This Jesus who is our heir, This Jesus who created everything according to Proverbs chapter number 8, as he is the embodiment of wisdom that danced there at creation. This Jesus who is the radiance. He is the radiance of the nature of God. He is what God is. I know we look in the Old Testament and we think that he's full of judgment, that he's full of fire and brimstone. We think that the Old Testament is a schizo God, and when we get to the New Testament, Jesus is a shepherd who plays with lambs all day, and he hangs out with sinners, and he goes, peace, man. He's a pacifist. No, it's the same God. From the book of Genesis to the book of Revelation, he's the same God. He's merciful in the Old Testament as well as the New. He is the radiance of the glory of God, the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the whole universe by the word of his power. And the Bible tells us, I got enough time to tell you this, that he makes purification for sins. That means that I ain't clean enough to get to heaven, but he purifies me. The one who created everything redeemed me. He keeps me and he holds me. The Bible says that he sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. You ever heard the phrase, my right-hand man? This is the man that'll get it done. Jesus is the right-hand man of the Father. That means he gets it done. Get her done. He done it. That means he sat down at the right hand of the Father. He didn't sit down because, he was tired. He sat down because he did what he did. He accomplished it. So Christian, if you're reading this little Hebrew letter and you're thinking about throwing in the towel, look at what has been done and what's being done on your behalf. He created everything. He's the heir of everything. He's the radiance of the glory of God. He's the imprint of his nature. He upholds the universe by the power of his word, and he purified you. And now he's sat down at the right hand of the Father. Usually at the end of the day, when we done doing what we doing, we got home from work, you know what we do? We sit down. You know why Jesus has sat down? Because he's purified you. He's created you. He's held you. He has inherited you. And he upholds you and keeps you. It's not that he's tired. Our God does not grow weary. So Christian, be encouraged. Read the little letter. Repent of your sin.